What's up, folks? We're back in studio on this Carving It Up Monday. We got tons to talk about in the world of sports and in pop culture as well. Going to start with the New York Knicks absolutely taking it to the San Antonio Spurs yesterday afternoon at Madison Square Garden. Discuss that, why I think everybody overreacted drastically on the Knicks in the lead up to this game. Get to that. In some football news, David Montgomery traded from the Detroit Lions to the Houston Texans, why Detroit is going into not a rebuild per se, but a bit of a retooling for the future. Get to that. Also talk about George Pickens. Cowboys franchise tagged him, and they don't need to go further than that. Get to that. Diego Pavia, a longtime villain of this show, didn't do himself any favors over the weekend at the NFL Combine. Gets that. At the end of the day's show, away from sports a little bit, the new FX docuseries, a love story about John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. Unbelievable stuff. Going to react to the first 3 episodes on this show. This is going to be kind of like a recurring series over the course of next month. So we've got an absolutely loaded episode of Carving Up Live. So let's drive the beat, baby. Here we go. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Carving Up Live right here on YouTube as well as on Facebook, X, and on Twitch. I am Bryson Carver. It is fantastic to be with you on this Monday, and I'll admit, going into the weekend, I wasn't sure that, there would be enough to necessarily do a full-length show. I thought about putting out maybe some short clips, but between some of the Combine stuff that came out, mostly regarding Diego Pavia, as you heard in the intro, with some NFL offseason stuff that broke today, David Montgomery being traded to the Houston Texans. Not a lot to say in regards to Houston with Detroit. I think there's a ton to react to on that front. The George Pickens tag news with the Cowboys, which broke last week. I mean, I ended up having to push a Los Angeles Lakers segment probably to Wednesday after they, I imagine, destroy their third garbage team they played, the G League Warriors, the basically equally G League Kings, and the New Orleans Pelicans, who've never found their way in my lifetime. We've got tons to get into in the show today, so let's get to our very first topic. But first, I know that with certain big brands in sports, there tends to be a riding the roller coaster, riding the ebbs and flows emotionally, especially if you're talking about the NBA. You're talking about an 82-game season. There's highs and lows. You go on winning streaks, losing streaks. Some days the fan base thinks we're going to sweep our way to the championship. Others, we may get swept in round one. It's all over the place. And look no further than the great people of New York, Knicks fans who love their basketball team, who go viral on an annual basis the last few years during the playoffs after big wins at home at Madison Square Garden. We know about Spike Lee, Tracy Morgan, Fat Joe, Ben Stiller, Timothy Chalamet, all the celebrities that sit courtside. There's a lot of ups and downs when it comes to the Knicks. And as recently as, 10 days ago, got trounced once again, third game, by the Detroit Pistons. Well, yesterday afternoon at MSG, facing a real true blue contender, the San Antonio Spurs, the New York Knicks put belt to, destroyed San Antonio, ended their long winning streak. And, I'm seeing a lot of, there seems to be a general sort of consensus about not just who the best 3 teams in the East are, but the 3 teams that can realistically say, we can win the conference. It's the Detroit Pistons, the Boston Celtics, didn't mean to hit my headphones there, and the New York Knicks. Like, those are the 3 teams everyone agrees upon. The standings reflected, the betting odds reflected, our general consensus as fans and media reflected. Those are the 3 best teams in the East. I think it is fair to say Detroit's proven themselves to be the best team. I think Detroit is the clear-cut favorite to make the finals out of the East. Kate Cunningham is a legit MVP candidate, and that is even without the ridiculous rules that could keep Jokic and SGA from being in contention. That's another conversation for another show. Cade's a legit MVP candidate. Jalen Duren, all these guys. Here's what I'll say about the Knicks, though. Because one of the major cases that people have had against them is they kind of struggle against good teams. Last year, they were just straight awful against true blue championship contenders. What is that reflected in? Well, in large part, the regular season standings. If you look at the top 3 seeds in the Western Conference and top 3 in the East as well, they were one of them last year. The Knicks were themselves the 3 seed last year, folks, against top 3 seed teams in the West and the East. Did you know the New York Knicks were 1-13? 1-13 in that stretch. This year they're 5-5. We can just go and show you the graphic. Like, top 3 seeds in both conferences. Last year, 1-13. They lost on average by 13.9 points a game. And in this case, they're 5-5, lose by an average of about 2 points a game. Well, obviously that number got much better after they dominated San Antonio yesterday. I'll talk more about the Spurs in just a few minutes because I'm very, very high on them. But with New York, I think, again, some of it's the big brand, some of it's people overreacting in the moment. Things aren't going so well. Folks say, oh, man, they just can't beat Detroit. I'm old enough to remember a year ago, didn't they literally get swept and swept badly outside of the last time they played in the regular season by the Boston Celtics? Swept in the regular season. I mean, Boston crushed them in 3 of the 4 matchups, and in the 4th, it went to overtime. That game didn't really mean much to Boston. And once you get to the playoffs, they beat him in 6. Bryson, Jason Tatum went down. Yes, Jason Tatum did go down. Jason Tatum might be back sooner rather than later. More on that in just a moment. But at the time Jason Tatum went down in that series, there was 3 minutes to go in Game 4. Knicks are up 2-1 in the series. 3 minutes to go in Game 4. Knicks got a 7-point lead. Now, the game's not over. In today's NBA, with the 3-point shot, the game's far from over. And Tatum actually had it going in that game as the best playoff game he'd had in 2-3 years. But the reality is, they probably weren't going to win that series. Again, if you think they come back in Game 4, okay, Boston ends up winning Game 5, the Knicks end up housing the Celtics in Game 6. Okay, there was still the Kristaps Porzingis health concern, which I'm a Warriors fan. I'm seeing what's going on with that in the organization right now. There was still the lack of depth that the Celtics have beyond their best 6 or 7 players. And so you mean to tell me this year, and I know every year's different in the NBA, but you mean to tell me this year, is Jason Tatum coming back to the Celtics? Because I think he is. Bill Simmons went out and said, yeah, it could be this Friday against Dallas. Like, Jason Tatum could be back before the weekend. Like, that's a very real possibility. So if that's being put out there, Tatum's coming back before the playoffs, well before the postseason starts for Boston. Why on earth am I supposed to think that a Jason Tatum, fresh off an Achilles surgery, trying to work his way back in the lineup, it's been almost a year since he's played basketball, coming back to a very, very different basketball team than what he left? Obviously, no Drew Holiday, no Al Horford, no Kristaps Porzingis. Now it's Drew Holiday, or not Drew Holiday. It's you still have Jaylen Brown and Derek White. You guys know I love Derek White, but you've added Nikola Vucevic, and you've got a number of role players around them. Jaylen Brown also MVP candidate. Now the Celtics kind of have to change how they play a little bit, whereas they didn't have to do that last year because they had the same cohesive unit all season long trying to defend their title. And so you mean to tell me the Knicks are just cooked against Detroit, or that they're not better than Boston today? I reject that. And I think what you saw yesterday, this sort of not segues me directly into San Antonio, but it's somewhat related in the sense that the number one main concern that people have about the Spurs isn't really related to their on-court production. It's not. It's like, oh, they're really young. I mean, the vet in their starting lineup is De'Aaron Fox, and I don't think he's 30 yet. Wemby's never been in the playoffs. Vassell, Stephon Castle, all these guys, like, never been in the postseason. They've got vets like Harrison Barnes, but by and large, Spurs are a pretty young team. Like, if you had to, I obviously do my NBA playoff strengths and weaknesses just like I do for the NFL in a month. Like, what's the biggest reason the Spurs won't win the title? A lot of folks think age. That's going to hurt them. What I would say in terms of on-court, maybe physicality, size and physicality bothers them to a certain degree. Karl-Anthony Towns, I don't know. Looks like he bothered Wemby a little bit. Now, Wemby still had a pretty good game. I think he had 25 points, but Cat seemed to bother him a little bit. Mikal Bridges, did his thing. Had 25 points in the game. Kudos to him. You got OG Anunoby, who, by the way, himself was guarding Victor Wembanyama, giving him problems. We know who Jalen Brunson is the postseason. He's the clutchest player we've seen in the last 5 years outside of Tyrese Halliburton. And listen, the thing that has done the Knicks in over the last few years, let's be honest, it's been Tibbs. It's been the fact that, Tom Thibodeau doesn't really believe in having a bench. he believes in using 6. If he's going really wild, maybe play a 7th player about 10 minutes and that's it. Run his starters into the ground, and by the end of the second round, or if they get to a conference finals, everybody's gassed. That's why the Knicks, who are a great clutch time team last year, with the clutch player of the year, Jalen Brunson, couldn't finish games against Indiana. Now, some of that's also Indiana was unbelievably clutch in the postseason, led, of course, by Tyrese Halliburton. Get well soon, Hallie. So now this year, you have a Mike Brown who, yes, while he has, his limitations as a coach, mostly on the offensive side of the basketball, Knicks are fine on that end. That offense was never the Knicks' problem. If he has them locking in on defense like he did yesterday, I mean, think about this, folks. Spurs scored 89 points yesterday. They had about 22 points halfway through the first quarter. So for the last, do the math, 42 minutes of the game, the Knicks held the Spurs to 67 points. That's for a team that's on a double-digit game winning streak, that's something. For a team in San Antonio that is by the game gaining on Oklahoma City, and I think at this point, frankly, is going to catch OKC in the standings. Obviously, they got the tiebreaker being 4-1 against the Thunder. That's saying something. Now, maybe you can chalk it up to afternoon game. Knicks always get up for those. Knicks are used to playing that 1 o'clock or at the latest 3:30, matinee games at MSG. Spurs aren't really necessarily, especially on the road. Spurs have been in New York City. I think they got to New York like early Thursday morning. They played the Nets, a couple of days off. Then they played an early game against the Knicks. They've gone on a winning streak. Like, eventually, listen, no winning streak's going to last forever, obviously. It was the next day. But what I will say is this, because many of you know, as I talked about last or before the season started, my pick to win the NBA Finals, my pick to come out of the West and win the Finals, if they were healthy, was my beloved Golden State Warriors. Well, I don't know if you noticed the Warriors lately. Jimmy Butler's got a blown ACL. Steph hasn't played in a month. And Kristaps Porzingis has played one game as a Warrior. So it ain't going to happen. Who's my pick out of the East? It was the Knicks. They've taken, they've taken this slow, steady progression, made some changes, obviously brought in Cat last year, brought in a new coach this year, where it's 2023, win a playoff series, 24, win a playoff series, and get to a game 7 despite the injuries. Last year, conference finals. Well, next logical step, NBA finals. Obviously, they beat Detroit in a playoff series last year. Both teams are a year more mature, and the Knicks have a better coach now, I think, than they did a year ago with Mike Brown over Tom Thibodeau. Let's not forget Mike Brown. You see what the Sacramento Kings are right now? Mike Brown coached that team with De'Aaron Fox, of course, to pushing the defending champion Warriors 7 games in 2023. Mike Brown can coach. Mike Brown's from the Steve Kerr coaching tree. Guy knows what he's doing. He's not, no one's going to accuse him of being Ty Lue or Spoelstra or something. He can coach. I think the Knicks are for real. Mikal Bridges talked about their defense after the game.
You were down 10 early and soon after went on a 19-point run. What turned that around?
Just defense. We did a great job defensively as a team and just helping each other out. Sometimes there'd be some missed coverages, but, next guy stepping up for each other. That's huge for us.
To that point, where have you guys gotten better defensively? And Mike Brown said that you guys have just been better on defense.
Yeah, I think just especially in pick and roll and I think just helping the helper. I think just helping more. I think in the past sometimes we're leaving guys on the island and not trusting each other as much. But, we talked about it and know we had to be better and, we keep getting better at it.
And that last point Mikal Bridges makes, that's a Mike Brown quote, so to speak. That's where he specializes, defensive end of the floor. And so if this Knicks team can be able to lock it in that, inside the basketball, Jalen Brunson does his thing offensively. Again, there's always going to be the criticism, the concern. What Karl-Anthony Towns are you getting from a game-to-game basis? You could be getting 27 and 12, or you could be getting 20 and 7. I mean, it really does depend game to game. Some of it depends on if he gets into foul trouble. It's this weird dynamic with Cat because there's this, and by the way, I'm not even disagreeing with this. There's always been this push. Shaq and Chuck have been, the guys talking about this for a long time. Man, you're 6'10", 6'11", big guy, physical. Get your butt down the block and be able to dominate people down low. And Cat's response, I'm sure, is like, A, I'm a great shooter, number one. Number two, when I am physical, I get in foul trouble. And now my team can't have me at all for stretches of games. Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can be able to get your butt down the block, especially in the offensive end of the floor, without being a guy who gets into foul trouble, who's on the bench on a consistent basis. I just think it feels like it's one of those years where it's just kind of a team's time to break through in either of the conferences. So like in the West, it's the great teams are mostly young. Or in the teams that aren't young have already won before. The Lakers have won before with LeBron. The Nuggets have won with Nikola Jokic. OKC's won with Shea, and they're still young. San Antonio's young. Houston's young. Is it Minnesota's turn to break through? Out East, Detroit's young. Boston has already won. Is it now the Knicks' time? and turn to get to their first final since 1999? Maybe. Maybe. It's on the board. So everybody was just panicking the last few weeks prior to this game. It's like, hey, it's a long season. You go through rough stretches. Knicks are going to be fine. There's battle tests as any team in the playoffs that hasn't been to a finals. I mean, they are. So, I mean, you tell me, you going to trust Cleveland more? You going to trust James Harden more than Jalen Brunson? I think you're talking about the wrong left-handed guard, to say the very least. And then quickly on San Antonio, listen, the streak was bound to come to an end. That's the reality of it. I think if you're a Spurs fan, it's a very weird predicament. Because the way I see it, both Detroit and the Knicks, those are the two best teams in the East. Boston is a legit contender with Tatum coming back, but that's going to be an adjustment. Again, as I talked about earlier, Tatum's coming back to a different team than what he got hurt, with last year. The team's going to have to kind of change. They play a little bit. Boston gets to the finals and wins the finals. I won't be shocked, but I would still have the Knicks and the Pistons above them. Out West, in theory, like, yeah, there's more contenders. But are there more contenders that can give the Spurs the most problems that what we saw the Knicks do yesterday? And what I mean by that is physicality. Listen, Victor Wembanyama, all-time great talent, the best draft prospect since LeBron 20 years prior. What was the knock on him? He's skinny. And that's, by the way, that's a knock with a lot of prospects. You see some of these great, college basketball prospects, you're like, golly, like you probably put on some muscle. Need to get with an NBA trainer the second you're drafted. And they always do. Like we're talking about kids. We're talking about 19, 20-year-olds. They look quite different. Look at a picture of Steph Curry in 2009 and a picture of Steph Curry now. Guys get in the weight room. Guys get with great trainers, health programs. They'll be fine. They'll be able to take care of their bodies if they're committed. But Wemby clearly has done that. He's much bigger now than he was 3 years ago. But this will be his first time with the Spurs getting the postseason that he's facing real-life playoff physicality. My question is this. Of the serious contenders in the West, who can exploit that? You say, well, Oklahoma City. You sure? Hey, we know about the Victor Wembanyama, Chet Holmgren beef. Like, those two are not, there's no love lost there. They do not like each other. Victor Wembanyama this year has been on a minutes restriction. Has played 28 minutes or less in all 5 of the matchups against OKC. Spurs have won 4 of the 5. Wemby's been unbelievably efficient. He's shooting over 50% for the field, like 60% from 3 unlimited attempts, but still. So I don't think OKC can exploit that. Maybe over the 7-game series they can, but OKC's great physical defenders, they're wings, not bigs. Like Lou Dort, for example, who we gave a cheap shot to Jokic yesterday, which was, in my opinion, quite dirty. Maybe he could do that to Wemby, I guess, if the NBA isn't looking at, with the fine-tooth comb or picking with a fine-tooth comb in terms of what they'll allow Lou Dort to do. But the most physical guys for OKC are not their bigs, are not Hartenstein, are not Chet Holmgren. Wemby can exploit that. Houston, if Steven Adams were healthy, we've got a conversation. We know what Steven Adams brings to the basketball, to the offensive side of the basketball when it comes to the physicality he brings. Not just offensive rebounds, but setting screens. Like Steven Adams can really wear a team down over the course of 7-game series. He did it to my Warriors, much smaller team than San Antonio, but Steve Adams wore us down in the first round a year ago. Well, he's gone for the season. Now it's Jabari Smith. Yeah, Jabari Smith's not going to destroy Wemby physically. That's not going to happen. You look down the list. Minnesota, maybe. Rudy Gobert's been better the last couple of years in the playoffs than he had been previously, but you know what Wemby's got on Rudy? He's played with him in France. There's a familiarity there. He knows how to combat Rudy Gobert. And Wemby, with respect to Rudy, Wemby's better. And Denver's a bad defensive team to begin with. Jokic, as great as he is, one of the greatest offensive players we've ever seen, he can't stop Wemby the other end of the floor. He can't. And then from there, Lakers, Ayton's going to give Wemby problems. Please, work on being Clint Capella first before you worry about stopping Victor Wembanyama. If you are DeAndre Ayton, Clippers can't, Warriors can't, Suns. From that point on, we're talking about pretenders. So in the West, I don't think there's anybody who can really, if the Spurs go out, it will probably be because, first rodeo. Even Oklahoma City, they lost in the playoffs before they won the championship. Lost in 6 games at Dallas 2 years ago, came back and won the title. Like a lot of times, the exception to the rule, honestly, 1977 Blazers. Like, that's the first instance in which you had a legendary player, or well, not just a legendary player, Bill Walton, obviously, but a Hall of Famer, but a team that had never been in the playoffs gets the playoffs, wins the championship their first year. That would be the kind of history the Spurs would be making. But Thunder were the youngest team since the 77 Blazers, won the title, so they made that history. In other words, the team that can give San Antonio the most problems physically, they're out east. It's Detroit. It's the New York Knicks, as we literally saw yesterday. It's no one in the West. Now, again, maybe 7-game series, guys' bodies wear down. Maybe that will come to fruition. I don't see it. Just from a pure personnel on-court perspective. But we'll see. Wemby talked about the Knicks' physicality last night.
The physicality was nothing you haven't seen before.
Yeah.
When that happened today, were you surprised that you guys didn't handle it as well as you have previously?
I was surprised. Yeah. It feels like they're a good basketball team. They got good actual basketball players, you know. They're not like the nastiest ugly team, you know. They're not an ugly team to watch, but they made our game ugly.
Yeah, and listen, that's something that San Antonio can be able to kind of look at if this ends up being the finals. And I'll just say this right now before we move on to the NFL and to the offseason. I'm just going to call it right now. That's your finals. That's going to be the NBA Finals. Mark it. March 2nd, 2026. That's going to be your NBA Finals. I picked the Knicks before the season to come out of the East. I picked the Warriors out of the West. Well, my caveat was if they stay healthy. They're nowhere near healthy. It's going to be San Antonio out of the West. They're 4-1 against OKC. And OKC's kind of dealing with their own inconsistencies. I'm rolling with the Spurs out of the West, Knicks out of the East. I don't pick who wins. Let me save that for June. But that's what we're going to get. Mark it right now. Knicks out of the East, Spurs out of the West. What you saw yesterday at MSG, that's your finals preview. And I think it would be a rematch, ironically, of the last time the Knicks were in the finals, 1999. So, should be fun. All right, let's move. This is sort of referencing the Detroit Pistons throughout that segment. Let's talk about the Detroit Lions. And in honor, I can't restrain myself. In honor of us doing a segment about the Detroit Lions, Dan Campbell, what y'all trying to do in 2026?
Kneecap.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. It's been a staple of the show for too long. We're not going to get rid of it now. So, Detroit Lions made some news today. They traded David Montgomery to the Houston Texans for some picks. David Montgomery, there have been some rumors that the Seahawks might get him because it looks like Kenneth Walker's on his way out the door in Seattle. We'll see what team offers him big money. He's a Super Bowl MVP. You imagine he'll command a solid salary there. He ends up in Houston. Quick take for the Texans. They've got this weird Nick Caserio, GM in Houston, has this like weird affinity for old running backs past their prime, whether it's Nick Chubb, whether it's Joe Mixon, who didn't play a snap for them last year, and based on the report, it looks like he's going to be released. They signed David Montgomery, or they trade for David Montgomery. Listen, Houston had a bad running game last year. A lot of that, honestly, I chalk up to the offensive line and to the limitations they have on that unit. They kind of went into a rebuild in their offensive line last offseason. Better get that right now so that you can ensure that, hey, CJ Stroud's the best has the best opportunity to have a bounce back season in 2026. I mean, this is going to be year 4 for CJ. Great rookie year, took a step back year 2, bad at the end of year 3. We saw those playoff games against Pittsburgh and against the Patriots. He was awful. Wasn't seeing the field. So for Houston, I don't hate the move. I don't like giving up that many picks, a 4th round. Like, I don't love it. Here's why I do like it for Detroit. So listen, let's show Dave Montgomery's resume with the Lions. He was quite good. He had over 2,500 rush yards in the 3 seasons he was with the Lions. He had 33 rush touchdowns, so quick math there. He had 11 touchdowns rushing the football season. 55 yards per game, 4.5 yards per carry, 3,100 total yards did Dave Montgomery account for with the Detroit Lions. And he was a good guy that Detroit would sometimes use on those double passes. I think he threw a touchdown to Jared Goff against Seattle a couple of years ago on Monday Night Football. Like, he was a great guy to fit inside that Detroit Lions culture. He's everything that Dan Campbell would want. Bruiser. I remember he had a game-winning touchdown run a couple of years back on opening Sunday night against the LA Rams. He fit what they were doing. And again, the sad thing from a branding perspective, if you're a Lions fan, is the death of the Sonic and Knuckles duo. Well, now it's just Sonic. Sonic the Hedgehog, which is Jahmyr Gibbs, and obviously Knuckles, kind of the bruiser, which is David Montgomery, who's now a Houston Texan. I think it's really interesting, folks, what the Detroit Lions are doing. Because it's weird to now refer to them as a well-run franchise, but let's be honest. Ownership hired a great GM in Brad Holmes. They hired a great coach in Dan Campbell. Listen, Dan Campbell, not the best staff last year. That's understandable when you lose both your coordinators to being head coaches. One of them, Ben Johnson, is brilliant. One, in the case of Aaron Glenn, might be coming back to Detroit next year to be their DC. This guy's falling asleep at the combine, for crying out loud. So that's not working with the Jets, but he's a great DC. But I trust Brad Holmes. The job he's done in the draft the last few years, how Detroit Lions have been able to attack the offseason. David Montgomery himself was an offseason pickup by Detroit prior to the 2023 season when they go to the NFC title game. Is that now you unload the salary. They just let go of one of their offensive linemen today, Glasgow. And the reality is for Detroit, so much, we talk about, we joke and play the soundbite there with the kneecaps and biting kneecaps and want to play physical and all that, but it really is a part of who they are. And offensively, it's kind of who they have to be. Listen, Jared Goff is a very, very productive quarterback who can be great given the Sunday. He absolutely can be. That game, I keep referencing the Seattle game 2 years ago when Montgomery threw a touchdown to Goff. Did Goff throw an incompletion that game? Listen, we know the book on Jared Goff. If he's got time to throw in the pocket, look the heck out. If he doesn't, you're cooked. He can't move. He's the last of a dying breed of pure pocket passers. That's just the reality. Well, Detroit last year, if I'm getting my numbers correctly, they were like 30th in pass block win rate. Well, that makes sense when you lose Frank Ragnow last year retirement. Glasgow now is gone. Like they could have some other guys retiring that offensive line. Like this is a team that is kind of falling apart up front and have been for the last year. And so if you are Brad Holmes, you're saying, okay, Jared Goff's a very solid franchise guy. We've got one of the elite offensive playmakers, one of the great young elite offensive playmakers we've seen in the last 25, 30 years in the league, and the numbers bear it out. We showed this a few months ago. Jahmyr Gibbs has the most touchdowns in NFL history before turning 24 years old. He's got 49. Barry Sanders is 47. Randy Moss, 44. Pretty good company. So Jahmyr Gibbs, obviously you're going to have to give him a contract this offseason, and the Lions will. You still got Amon-Ra St. Brown. You still got Jamison Williams, who, when he's not making foolish decisions, is an excellent player. You still got, obviously, the Tesla kid who they like. Maybe he takes a step in year 2. And let's be honest, wide receiver, pass catcher, that's the easiest, type of guy to find in the draft. I mean, Puka Nacua, what was he, a 5th-round pick? That's very common in the NFL. It's rebuilding the defense, rebuilding the offensive line. What Detroit has going on their side. And this, I was watching a show the other day, and they were talking about worst to first teams. Like there's always that conversation in the offseason. It's a big conversation in sports gambling. Which NFL team, there's always like one or two worst to first. Worst team in their division, 1 year, the next year, they win the division. They're hosting at least one playoff game. And it was mentioned, okay, are the Lions going to go from worst to first? And I remember everyone on the show being like, the Lions were last in the division. It's like, yeah, Minnesota, based on tiebreakers, they beat Detroit twice last season. Minnesota was 3rd in the division. Detroit came in last. Obviously, Green Bay 2nd, Chicago 1st. So that a soft schedule, at least relative to the rest of their division opponents, that's on their side. Having an outstanding GM in Brad Holmes, that works for them. Dan Campbell hiring, I think, an upgrade at offensive coordinator over Johnny Morton. That's going to help. Continuity certainly doesn't hurt matters. And now, with respect to David Montgomery, he did have a career low in touches last season. Well, guess what? Those touches, a lot of them, they go to Jahmyr Gibbs, which we just showed you the graphic. He scores a lot. He's got 49 touchdowns in 3 years. Pretty good. Pretty versatile. And so I don't look at this as a rebuild, because if it was a rebuild, they'd be trading a bunch of guys. I look at it as a little bit of a retooling. So by no means am I saying the Lions aren't going to be a really good team next year. Frankly, I wouldn't be shocked if they're back in the playoffs. When they did get their NFC title game 2023, 1 seed 2024, even though they lost to Washington their first playoff game. But ultimately, I think it's a long time away, but by 2027, we could see them back in sort of that, 13, 14 win type of season. Just fix the defense, fix the offensive line over the course of a couple of offseasons. The first things first, you got to get that offensive line right. was bad last year. They dealt with some retirements. They just cut Glasgow. Like, they've got to rebuild that front in order for Jared Goff to be comfortable, because we know that's a prerequisite for him being successful. Any quarterback, but especially Jared Goff. And so I don't mind this move at all for the Detroit Lions making. Got a comment, my guy Patrick Brown from the Grid. He says, Dan Gamble Campbell. He started calling that at the end of last season, which I like. Dan Gamble Campbell needs to reclaim Detroit's identity. When he took over as play caller, their season went downhill. And Patrick actually wrote a piece on the Grid's website where I think he detailed the numbers of that bad stretch. Part of the reason Dan Campbell took over play calling, Johnny Morton wasn't very good. And I think it's, for me and for this show, because frankly, I don't see it on a lot of other shows, if any, so many, like clockwork. The teams that are good, we think will be good next year. Okay. One of the number one reasons they're not, there was injuries, but when they lose brilliant coordinators, is it any shock that when the Detroit Lions lost Ben Johnson? Oh, what a shock. The most brilliant offensive mind since McVay and Shanahan leaves, the offense ain't as good. Like, that's, of course. Jeff Hafley leaving Green Bay. Okay, is that defense going to be good? Yeah, it's good. Yeah, they have Micah Parsons. That's kind of it. Back into their secondary, got a lot of problems. So I think when we've seen this with Philadelphia, losing two offensive coordinators, team ain't the same. And so, like Seattle, for example, Clint Kubiak, he's the head coach of the Raiders now. So we'll see. I think Seattle hired in-house. That, and Seahawks are a great organization. Kudos to them. They're the Super Bowl champions. That can be a very risky proposition. Now, eventually, there's the brain drain. You kind of run out of guys. You got to start hiring in-house, especially when you're playing so late in the season, when you're playing in February in the Super Bowl, which is the ultimate goal. The downside of that is you're at a disadvantage in terms of your offseason prep. Not just in terms of draft free agency, but in terms of your coaching staff. So I think I say all that to say there does need to be more of an emphasis. Maybe it's not sexy. Maybe it's not a conversation that's as fun as over-unders or who's going to be good next year, whatever the case may be. Coordinators matter a lot in this league on both sides of the ball. And so whether Detroit is able to rebound, again, you don't expect the same production from their offense you got with Ben Johnson. Like the Bears, you expect them to be even better with Ben Johnson in year two. That's how Detroit was. So coordinators matter in this league, and I think the Lions are finding that out. So they got some retooling to do, not a full rebuild. Good thing on their side, they get a last place schedule. We'll see how it plays out. All right, when we come back, we're staying in the NFC, and we're talking about America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. They franchise tagged George Pickens last week, and I think it's a great move. And I would not go a step further. Talk about that in just 1 minute on Carving Up Live, folks. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Carving Up Live. Appreciate everybody for stopping by on a Monday. So before we get into our next segment about George Pickens, check out our Carving It Up merch. Scan the QR code on the top left corner of your screen. We've got Carving Up. I'm wearing a Carving Up hoodie right now. We got hoodies. We got t-shirts. We got hats. We got bags. We got, listen, I've advertised our sweatpants. Listen, might as well get the Carving It Up jogging shorts because I don't know if you're looking. Weather's going to be pretty good around the country this week in most parts of, America. So check out all we got on the website. We've also got other, merch from our other content creators on the Grid Network. We got Barry Grant Jr. All Even Podcast. We've got Cowboys Camp Fan. We've got Saturday Morning Tailgate with some great shows on the Grid. Mike and Josh do a fantastic job. So check out all of our merch on the Grid's website. And if you just want just straight Grid Network merch where it just says The Grid, GRYD, Yeah, we got that too. We got hats, t-shirts, hoodies, the whole bit. So scan the QR code, top left corner of your screen. We would greatly appreciate it if you support and rep the brand. Now, let's talk about them. America's team, Dallas Cowboys. How about them Cowboys? Yeah! Well, Cowboys are, starting their offseason like everybody else. So I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to do much on the Jerry Jones quote where he's talking about we're going to spend more money in free agency this year than we usually do. It's like, okay, believe it when I see it. What did he say 2 years ago that they were all in? How'd that work? What did they sign a linebacker or something? That was it. Here's what I want to talk about. George Pickens. So many of you on this show know I've had a very tumultuous relationship as a fan with George Pickens. I'm a Steelers fan. So I see this kid who I watched in college live in person. I was at a Tennessee football game back in 2019. We were facing Georgia that year. I see this kid making these one-handed behind-the-head catches of warm-ups. I'm like, who the heck is this dude? You see, okay, George Pickens. You look at George Pickens. Oh, my gosh, I got to watch this guy. And he gets drafted in Pittsburgh, and by the midway through his second year, end of his second year, like, God, this guy's going to be a superstar. Route running, speed, catch radius, hands, size, like he's got the whole freaking package physically. But of course, the crash outs were, let's just say, frequent, including literally in the middle of plays, as we saw in a Hail Mary in the snow globe between the Steelers and Browns on a Thursday night game 2 years ago. He was fighting, I think it was Greg Newsome, a defensive back in the end zone during the middle of a Russell Wilson Hail Mary, like head case. So the Steelers trade George Pickens, last year of his rookie contract, to the Dallas Cowboys, and George Pickens, we can show you the numbers, was quite good. Matter of fact, was awesome. Tied for 8th in receiving touchdowns, 3rd in receiving yards, 8th in catches, 6th in yards per catch, and 4th in receiving yards per game. George Pickens was not good. He was fantastic, especially, by the way, early in the season. CeeDee Lamb suffers an early season injury, misses about a month. George Pickens steps up and is fantastic against Green Bay, Carolina, the Jets. Like, he steps up in those games. But I remember distinctly, shout out to Jerry Dulac, who does a fantastic job covering the Steelers, has for a long time. I remember so distinctly him going on the Rich Eisen show. Shout out to Rich as well. Great guy, ultimate professional. And when George Pickens is in the midst of this stretch of playing the best football of his career, in large part because he's playing the best quarterback of his career by a mile, Dak Prescott, Rich Eisen asked Jerry Dulac, I think the Steelers having second thoughts about this? And Jerry's like, no, because they didn't trade George Pickens because of production. They didn't trade him because he wasn't good. That was never the problem. It was late for team meetings, heck, late for games in some instances. Not great with the media at all. Kind of a selfish teammate, pouts. If he's not getting the ball, defensive coordinators can literally see on film, okay, 14's not getting the ball because he's kind of slouching his shoulders. Okay, this is going to be a run play or a screen to Calvin Austin or somebody. George Pickens isn't getting the football here. And what do you know? Post-Thanksgiving, George Pickens' production plummets. Once the games get bigger for Dallas, remember the Cowboys had that streak where like, okay, they beat the Raiders. Holy crap, they come back from 21 down to beat Philly. Holy crap, they beat the Chiefs on Thanksgiving. Cowboys are back. From that stretch on, when the games really mattered the most. Frankly, when there's more pressure on George Pickens than ever to show up and show out to give the Cowboys a Hail Mary chance of getting the postseason. When CeeDee Lamb goes down again against Detroit, what did George Pickens do? Well, he disappeared. He was a shell of that player. So really, the first two stats, or the first line there, 1,100 yards in the first 12, 287. Forget those. Of course, there's a discrepancy there. First 12 games, George Pickens, 95 receiving yards per game. Last 5 games, 57. First 12 games, he had 8 touchdowns. The last 5, he had 1. Head case, pouting on the sidelines. In the game, to me, the most flagrant example was that game on Thursday night against Detroit, which Dak played well. CeeDee Lamb is out. Cowboys defense, shocker, was awful. And it gets to a point in the game where you see Dak trusting Ryan Flournoy and Jake Ferguson. Nice players, but nowhere near the talent of George Pickens. He's trusting those guys more than he's trusting Pickens with no CeeDee Lamb. So the Cowboys tagged him. He's going to make $27 million a year this year. And the Cowboys would be out of their minds to give him an extension. Out of their minds. Buddy, you've got to prove it to us for a full season, start to finish, that you can be on your best behavior, that you can behave, to be frank, like an adult. That if you're not getting targets, sometimes you just don't get targets. Like that's reality. And that's easy for someone like me or someone who's not a receiver to say. Receivers, their perspective is, man, how many times we get the ball thrown in our directions? Quarterback touches every play, running the football. How many times do we get an opportunity when we are dangerous as with the ball in our hands? George Pickens, certainly one of those guys. CeeDee Lamb doesn't act that way. Justin Jefferson doesn't act that way. Puka Nacua doesn't act that way. Jackson Smith-Njigba. So this whole idea of, all receivers divas, not necessarily. Matter of fact, some of the best going on right now aren't what you would necessarily call divas. Jackson Smith-Njigba, ultimate professional. Puka Nacua, doofus off the field, professional on it. Right? You talk about Justin Jefferson, ultimate professional. Imagine Justin Jefferson. This guy comes in the league, solid QB Kirk Cousins. Then you get Sam Darnold coming in, you're like, holy crap, we've got our guy. Yeah, he had a couple bad games at the end of the season. And then you go to J.J. McCarthy and your numbers plummet. He's handled it perfectly. George Pickens gets an upgrade. He goes from Mason Rudolph and Russell Wilson and Justin Fields to Dak Prescott. And by the way, his numbers reflected it. Career year. But by the end of this, as the season wore on, he was less and less emotionally reliable and on the field disappeared during games, during must-have moments. Drop balls, half-hearted routes. I remember distinctly there was a deep ball against Detroit. Dallas is down 14 2 minutes ago. Dak throws a deep ball to George Pickens. He has a chance to run that thing down, and he just kind of jogs. That's who he's always been. And when you think about the top 5 highest paid receivers in football, we can show you that graphic. I mean, one of them is a Cowboy, CeeDee Lamb. Jamar Chase, $40 million a year. Like, that's obviously the bar right now. He's the highest paid in terms of average annual value. Justin Jefferson, his former LSU teammate, 35. CeeDee Lamb, 34. DK Metcalf, 33. And Garrett Wilson, 32.5. You're telling me, and by the way, A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin are kind of right there at 32. So, like, those are the top 7 highest paid. You tell me George Pickens, you trust him long-term over 4 and 5 years. In addition, to be able to maintain a steady level of A, production, and B, just not losing his mind on the sidelines, not quitting on the ultimate professional quarterback, Dak Prescott, not letting the Cowboys down if CeeDee Lamb twists an ankle. Because I'll tell you one thing, Pickens, absolutely more talented than CeeDee Lamb. Anybody will tell you that. CeeDee Lamb has had a bad case of the drops at times, but other than that, emotionally reliable, by and large, with the exception of last year, physically reliable. You know what you're getting from 88. You do. You have absolutely no idea with Pickens. None. Not to mention the dumb 15-yard penalties he'll commit on a consistent basis. So yes, the franchise tag, listen, you can't let him go. You don't let George Pickens walk. You keep him on a 1-year contract, paying him about $27 million a year. And by and large, listen, I have been against the franchise tag for a long time. It is like the in-between space of the engagement ring and, going on your first date. It's like that in-between space. Like, are we trying to get to the next level, or are we still sort of in the early stage? Like, I don't know. There's like a, do you like me? Yeah, we like you. We're going to pay you a lot of money, just not beyond this year. And it creates some tension in the organization between player and front office, understandably so. But if they're ever a guy to get the franchise tag to, it's him. If they're ever a guy that is due for an extension, Dallas, that deserves it, it's Brandon Aubrey. Brandon Aubrey, the reports are he's looking for the biggest contract ever for a kicker. Absolutely worth it. Not only is he the greatest, arguably the greatest long-distance kicker ever, but I think his field goal percentage is like 88%, which in a weird way is almost kind of unfair to him because he's attempting 58-plus yarders, 65-yarders. You know how important special teams are in this league? It's what's gotten San Francisco beat for years in the playoffs. You got your kicker locked up? Done. But we don't have to worry about that in Dallas. So I think at the end of the day, that's, if you're a Cowboys fan, yeah, we'll keep George Pickens, but it's not something that we're intent on doing long-term. Again, just show that graphic one more time. He was great, until you need him to be. Until, there was that moment where the Cowboys looked like, oh, could they be like a sneaky playoff team? Nope. So that's the reality with this guy. Shifting now. Oh, my goodness. I have to have a sip of water for this one. Because as many of you out there know, if I had to make a hierarchy of college football players that I found easy to root for during the 2025 season, Diego Pavia would not be in the top 90% of those guys. He'd be above everybody that don't have serious legal issues off the field. And I talked about this a few months ago. It got some pushback, and that's fine. But I said, go back, check the tape. Two things about Diego Pavia when it came to, okay, once we get to the combine with this guy, because the NFL combine was last week, and quarterbacks worked out at the end of the week, is that two things. Number one, I think he's going to impress a lot of people with his athleticism. Not just was he good in some of the passing drills. Like you saw some of these quarterbacks out here like, oh, gosh, there's some accuracy issues there. There's some mechanical issues there. Didn't really seem to be the case with Pavia. He's, again, if you're a 24-year-old quarterback coming out of college, you're much closer to your ceiling. That's why teams, Joe Burrow's kind of the exception. Teams kind of tend to stay away from older quarterbacks coming out of college. Maybe Tyler Shuck will be the exception too. Who knows? You're closer to your ceiling than if you're 21. Then you saw a video of him doing like a backflip. Like Diego Pavia is a great athlete. Fast. Some of those deep balls, you had Daniel Jeremiah and Rich Eisen on the NFL Network. Like, golly, he's kind of got a good arm on him. Nice width there down the field. Okay. Now, granted, he's throwing against air, but still, it's better than some of those quarterback prospects did. But the other thing I said on this show a few months ago about Diego Pavia and about what to expect from him come the combine is that the NFL combine, let's call it what it is. It's a big, glorified job interview. That's what it is. Not just showing your physical traits, but your emotional, your intellectual traits. Certainly for quarterbacks. And there's going to be time beyond, listen, the draft is in, 7 weeks or so in Pittsburgh. There's going to be plenty of times for these guys to, to interview with teams, to work out for teams. Fernando Mendoza didn't throw at the combine. He's going to work out for the Raiders, maybe for the Jets. We'll see. But this is like the televised, this is a televised job interview. Because we don't have cameras inside the meetings with these players in the organizations. We've got cameras everywhere with these guys answering questions to the media. And so much of this is not just showing up physically on the field, but maybe if you got some baggage off of it to dispel those notions. And Diego Pavia, 3 months removed from one of the most embarrassing weekends by any Heisman finalist in my lifetime, trashing Fernando Mendoza, who's like the most likable player in college football, trashing Indiana, who, rolled to an Addy, trashing everybody, trashing the voters, some of which, I don't know, voted for you to be second. 3 months removed from all of that. And by the way, losing to Iowa in your bowl game, just for the record. Here was Diego Pavia talking about his maturity, which, is kind of a point of concern and should be. Diego Pavia, when asked about his maturity coming in the National Football League.
Yeah, Coach Lee always preached that, you're not, your frontal lobe isn't fully developed until you're 25. And I just turned 24, so I got like 360 more days to go.
Never in my life did I think I would see an old, by NFL draft standards, 24 years old, an old NFL draft prospect at quarterback bragging about immaturity. Dude, if you're Diego Pavia, if you're Carson Beck, who was in college for a long time, if there's one thing the draft evaluators, scouts, teams, if there's one thing they should not be worried about, it's maturity. Hey, he's played college football a long time. Maybe he's worked in multiple different systems. He's probably transferred. Diego Pavia, listen, Vanderbilt was his third destination. And by the way, pretty good third destination if you look at the numbers. 64 touchdowns, 12 picks, 65% completion. The guy averaged 284 yards a game, 157 rating, 17-8 at Vanderbilt, for crying out loud. Second team All-SEC his first year. Vanny in a second year, SEC Offensive Player of the Year, first team All-Conference, and he was second for the Heisman Trophy. Pretty good. This is the rare instance in which, for an older quarterback coming out of college football, there's more concerns about maturity than production. And his production is underscored by his physical traits. He's 5'9". He's my height. Vanderbilt listed him at 6 feet tall. That got dispelled when we saw him next to the other Heisman Trophy finalist. When we saw him next to Fernando Mendoza, like, oh, is Fernando Mendoza like 6'6"? Like, what the heck? Ain't that big of a discrepancy here. And in an era where small quarterbacks are less valuable than they've ever been, maybe since the Doug Flutie days. I mean, it was kind of a narrative that Doug Flutie never got a fair shot because of his size. It's not to that level now, but I would say their market's the smallest that it's been in years. Kyler Murray, Cardinals can't wait to get rid of him. Some of that's leadership issues and availability, but production's dipped. Talk about guys like Tua, Dolphins, it looks like they're going to release him and just eat the dead money. Russell Wilson, look at how he's playing. Heck, let's be honest, without great play calling, Baker Mayfield wasn't very good at the end of last season. Smaller quarterback. Drew Brees, I've said this for years. Drew Brees is the exception, not the rule. The fact that a 6-foot guy who wasn't a great athlete, and shoulder surgery, by the way, ends up being one of the 10 greatest ever, most accurate quarterback in NFL history, the guy who had all the major NFL records at the time of his retirement, it's remarkable. Exception, not the rule. And if you are Diego Pavia, it's dispel the goal at the common. Yes, impress people physically, but again, that wasn't really a question. Again, 5'9", you kind of are what you are. But it's dispel the off-field maturity issue. So he brags about being immature. And then, this is remarkable. This is like a Saturday Night Live skit. He talks about how his mentor, the guy that he really looks to for advice, as we'll show you in this clip, Johnny Manziel.
Yeah, he's giving me the what to look out for, what it's like, how to stay in the process. And, you know, he's giving me some good advice for sure. And he always reaches out too, checks up on me, make sure I'm good. And he's just a friend to me, you know. And so he's giving me some mentorship. He's been around me. He's been around my family. He's just a great person for those that really don't know.
By the way, based on the last decade off the field, I don't doubt that Johnny Manziel has, you know, matured. I mean, kind of hard not to in a decade, but still, like, is Johnny Manziel now more mature now than he won the Heisman Trophy in 2012? Yeah, obviously. Like, I've seen him do some podcast stuff with Shannon Sharp and Ocho Cinco on Nightcap. He's really good on that show. Like, Johnny Manziel is the type of dude, like, especially at this stage of his life. Listen, he's still, at times, living the nightlife. That's his right to do so. Seems like a cool guy. Seems like a good buddy. But I've heard folks say, there's like going on vacation friends and 3 a.m. friends. Now, I'm not saying, listen, this is not to assassinate Johnny Manziel's character, saying he's not like loyal or whatever. I don't really know much about him off the field. I think he's matured a lot off the field, but for Diego Pavia to say, yeah, by the way, you would think, knowing, hey, people think I'm kind of immature. So you know what I'm going to say? Johnny Manziel's my mentor. Huh? Meanwhile, you've got guys, listen, I don't know if I buy him as a franchise quarterback. You know who, in many ways, Shedeur Sanders' mentor is? Tom Brady. Now, again, his dad being Deion Sanders, he has more access to a guy like Tom Brady than Diego Pavia would, but choose the people, this goes in life. Choose who you spend your time around wisely. This whole weekend, this whole 3-month stretch, dating back to when it was just the ultimate insult to have Diego Pavia second to Fernando Mendoza, despite the fact that outside of yards per game, which the only reason Pavia beat Mendoza there is because Mendoza set 1 million fourth quarters because Indiana destroyed everybody. Mendoza beat him in literally every single statistical category. Touchdowns, he had fewer turnovers, he had more top 10 wins. Like, what are we doing? And so Pavia already wasn't going to have a great chance to make it in the league just based on size alone. But for a guy to have 3 months, or really more like 2.5 months or so, 2.5 months, 3 months, between the embarrassing weekend in New York with the Heisman Trophy ceremony, all the way to now at the Combine, you'd think this guy would have, at least at 24 years old, a shred of self-awareness to get rid of some of the yes men in his life. Listen, I don't know if this is a Theo Vaughn thing. I don't know if this is a Vanderbilt's good for the first time in like forever. Therefore, I'm like a superhero in Nashville. When, by the way, buddy, there's more Tennessee fans in Nashville than there are Vanderbilt fans, just for the record. I don't know what it is, but to go from, I said this a few months ago, to go from 5'9", underdog story. This guy was at a military school. Then he goes to New Mexico and wins there. And then he goes to Vanderbilt. He goes to the worst program in the SEC and wins there. Year 2, they win 10 games. Heisman finalist. And people can't stand him. That's hard. That is really hard to do. And Diego Pavia pulled it off. So if that's how he is with the media, smug, just throwing caution to the wind is like, yeah, I am immature. That's like one of the number one traits that you want your quarterback to not be. But it goes to show, and we know this, maturity is not based on age. I have met 10-year-olds who are more mature than 60-year-olds. We know those people in our lives. Diego Pavia falls in the unfortunate category with a 24-year-old who still, after years and years of college football, you think after years of media training, still doesn't get it. So if he could hurt his draft status anymore, he just did. He did. Nationally televised job interview, and he bombed. He said his mentor is a guy with one of the worst off-field histories of any quarterback that we've seen in the last quarter century. And he literally bragged about not being mature. What are we doing? We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, though, for our last topic, very excited to do this. We're going to be doing this over the course of the next few weeks. Is that there's a show on FX. You can watch it through Disney Plus, but FX is producing the show about John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. That is absolutely fascinating. You guys know me. I'm a diehard. I always hesitate to say presidential historian because there are historians who are immensely more qualified to talk about history than I am. But I've always been interested in that for even longer than sports. The show's fantastic. We will recap each week. We'll recap the most recent episode. What we're going to do this week is first 3 episodes today, next 2 tomorrow. Episode 6 comes out on Thursday. We'll review it on Monday's show. So stay tuned for that. Love story reaction on Carving Up Live in just 1 minute. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Carving Up Live. I appreciate everybody for stopping by on Monday. Before we get out of here, and we occasionally do segments like this, particularly, let's be honest, when it's not football season and it's not just wall-to-wall coverage of NFL and to a degree college football stuff, is we occasionally dabble in some politics, some pop culture. Well, in this case, it's kind of a marriage of both. And so FX, a few weeks ago, started to air the brand new series. It's called Love Story. It's about John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, the iconic 90s couple, obviously the son of the 35th president of the United States, and his wife who worked at Calvin Klein and was very much an elusive, You don't really know that much about her type of figure. What we're going to be doing over the next few weeks is recapping the episode. So today, again, it's going to be somewhat condensed today and on Wednesday, because today, recapping the first 3, Wednesday, episodes 4 and 5, and then each episode, I think, comes out on Thursday nights. We'll recap the next episode on Monday. There's 4 to go, so we've still got plenty of time the rest of this month. So by and large, let me say this on the front end. So again, I have my entire life been fascinated in presidential history. And so, of course, one of the initial names that comes up is somebody like John F. Kennedy. And it's hard not to be fascinated with this guy. It's like, okay, youngest president ever elected. You're talking about somebody who is born into American royalty, so to speak, this political dynasty, the Kennedys, and first Catholic president. And he was only president for the fabled 1,000 days. He dies in an assassination in front of everybody, November 1963. And there's the Camelot ethos and the Kennedy family, all of it. There's so much to talk about there. I will be completely honest when I say this. Outside of the baseline information, I really didn't know that much about JFK Jr. I didn't. Again, I was born in 2003. So that was, about 4 years after his wife and his sister-in-law tragically passed in that plane crash at Martha's Vineyard. And so I didn't know that much about him, and certainly didn't know much at all about his wife. And so this show kind of goes into that. Obviously, it's a show based on real events. They're going to dramatize it a little bit, but by and large, by what I've read from family and loved ones of these 2 individuals, they've kind of gotten it right. So episodes 1 through 3 is what we're recapping today, and then we're going to do 4 and 5 on Wednesday. So first of all, I think it is an interesting choice by Ryan Murphy to start. And by the way, just want to say this, all spoilers ahead. If you haven't seen the show and you don't want any spoilers, turn the show off, because that's all we're going to be doing. I think it's really interesting that Ryan Murphy chooses first, 5-10 minutes of the show. We're taking you to July of 1999. We're taking you Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. At that point, Bessette Kennedy is chased by the press. We know about the difficulty she had with that. JFK Jr., is recovering from a broken leg. He and his sister-in-law, Carolyn's sister, travel to the airport, and there's this tense exchange between husband and wife, and then it kind of is resolved. Plane takes off. Well, obviously, we know what happens. And then it cuts 7 years earlier. And that's when we kind of get on the linear track of the story. Here's what I'll say first and foremost. Because for the record, both of the actors that played JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, outstanding. Not just in terms of the physical resemblance, but just in terms of the vibe that they bring around these characters. So it starts with Sarah Pigeon, who plays Carolyn Bessette, getting out of bed, going out, walking the streets of New York anonymously. Of course, that's going to change in a few years, but she's just dope. She there's a swagger, there's a vibe. Obviously, the 90s soundtrack adds to it. If you ask anybody from that time period, they talk about the 1990s, like Gen Z kids like myself talk about the 2010s as like the peak of society. And I'll be honest, I can see what they're talking about with that for a number of reasons, one of which being, the soundtrack from that era, which is prevalent in the entire show. So it's, she's working at Calvin Klein, and she's working with a celebrity. She's working, for Calvin Klein directly. And so you have that aspect to it. So first takeaway from Carolyn Bessette, dope, chill, really, really cool. Then it cuts to JFK Jr., and there's the Hunk Flunks story. I think it was in the New York Post, and he's dealing with some relationship issues of his own with the actress Daryl Hannah. And there's a great scene early on. It's JFK Jr., it's his mother, Jackie Kennedy Onassis, his sister Caroline, and her husband Ed. And it's just this very tense. Naomi Watts, who we know is a legendary actress, does an unbelievable job playing Jackie Kennedy. We've never really seen Jackie Kennedy played in the later stages of her life, partly because she was very elusive. We don't have that much from her life by and large, certainly relative to when she was first lady. And even when she, was Jackie Kennedy Onassis. I thought Naomi Watts did a really good job portraying her in that respect. And there's sort of like this tense back and forth. She doesn't like that John is with Daryl Hannah, this actress. And there seems to, over the course of the next few episodes, be this sort of underlying, it's never outright said explicitly, but that there's almost like a trauma of JFK Jr. being with a blonde celebrity because, of course, her husband, JFK, the infamous affair with Marilyn Monroe. So it brings back bad memories for her potentially. And so there's that component. There's this tense exchange. Then they end up meeting, of course. There's the whole, they meet at like a charity, Calvin Klein charity event. Calvin Klein himself, I don't know if this actually happened, but introduces them. There's this exchange where, wait a second, the guy who was the 1988 People's Sexiest Man Alive, he's having to chase her, so to speak, as opposed to the other way around. Yeah, she's playing hard to get, but he's the one who's pursuing her, not the other way around, which is very foreign to him, and I think is what attracts him to Carolyn right off the bat. So you have that. He ends up getting a suit from Calvin Klein the next day. They go on a date. It's the first time where I think she sees him like, oh, he's a normal guy who's very, 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 very famous. There's an exchange where he says something along the lines of, I mean, like, did you think I was just shuttled around on a motorcade my whole life? And she was like, yeah, kind of. Like, that's kind of how the media portrays you. That's how America has seen you. And so the first date goes well, and then she's like in a great mood. Oh my gosh. And then she looks at the paper, JFK Jr. and Daryl Hannah are back together. And that's basically how episode 1 ends. So go to episode 2. And again, going back to the soundtrack and going back also as well. New York City is like the third main character in this show. Listen, I visited New York for the first time this past December. And it was during the holidays too, so we know how the city is, particularly Manhattan during that time of year. Met some good friends of mine. Shout out to Barry. Shout out to Alfred. And it's fantastic. The city in general. Again, I was only there for a couple of days for the House of Highlights shoot, but it was just the vibe, the atmosphere, the go, go, go. No one is stopping for anything. City that never sleeps. The traffic, like it just got a whole sort of vibe that is captured very, very well in the show. I think the show's shot in New York, so it makes sense. But the soundtrack is great too. There's the first scene where John Jr. is pursuing Carolyn. There's the flowers that he keeps sending to her Calvin Klein office, and it's playing the never gonna get it, never gonna get it. It's like it's a perfect fit for that. And so eventually you see the dynamic between him and Daryl Hannah. And listen, I don't know enough about Daryl Hannah to have an opinion on her. She's still alive. I will say the portrayal of her makes her seem really, really dumb. And I hope that's not an unfair, or I hope it is an unfair characterization, because she does not look good in the show, the way she's portrayed as it relates to how she kind of likes JFK Jr. for the notoriety that it brings her. And it's, especially after going on a date with Carolyn, it's like, oh man, this is probably not going to last that much longer. They end up meeting again, the eventual married couple at I think Kelly Klein was Calvin Klein's wife at the time. She's having an event for a book. And in all of this, Carolyn is with a model wannabe, basically. Like they're not like explicitly dating, but they're very obviously together. And she meets him again, and she's still trying to do this hard to get thing. He's very much not. And there's a line where he says, did you get my flowers? She's like, yeah, which ones? And there's a really distinct part where you kind of start to feel bad for this guy. He says, he pursues her again. He says, I just wish I could explain to you how even the simplest things can become so complicated for me. How bad I wish I was someone else when I met you. And it's sort of the first time I think you see it in her, and you definitely see it in him, where he's found someone that's interested in John, not John F. Kennedy Jr., son of the 35th president of the United States and heir to the Kennedy throne. And so I found that interesting. So end of the episode, and I didn't know this. So JFK Jr. and Daryl Hannah basically break up. She leaves to go to L.A., leaves the dog with him. The next day, he's walking the dog in New York City. Someone asks for an autograph. He signs it, lets the leash go, and the poor dog runs out and gets hit by a car and dies. I think they called it like dog gate at the time. Like it was bad. So he breaks up with his girlfriend, gets her dog killed like the next day or soon after. There's a scene with him like in a plane with the ashes. Like it sucks. And then by the end of the episode, Jackie Kennedy, who had been dealing with health issues throughout that time. She like collapses in the floor, and that's kind of the first introduction of like, oh yeah, she has cancer. And then by the start of episode 3, she's really sick. She's walking. There's a great scene, Naomi Watts and Paul Anthony Kelly, who plays JFK Jr. They're like walking out in this park area. And he, at the time right now, he's trying to start the George magazine, which was basically what I've read about it, it appears to be like the Daily Show, but before its time, but in magazine form, like this intersection between politics and pop culture. JFK Jr. is like, I'm involved in both worlds. I'm the guy that can kind of merge these two together and get more young people involved in what's going on. And so he's talking to his mom about that. And he's saying basically like, I don't want people to be interested in this magazine just because my name's attached to it. Like, I want them to be interested in the content, in what's like, it's a different sort of problem for him in that most of us, yeah, we're grinding from the bottom, trying to get to the top. He's at the top. So he's trying to establish that any business venture he pursues is legitimate because of his merits, not because of his name. And Jackie Kennedy has a line to him. I think I wrote this down. Do I have it? Maybe I saved it in my notes here. Okay. So he says, he's talking about the issue. And she says, quote, "You think your father won his congressional seat solely on merit? No. He capitalized on his charm, his magnetism, his father's good fortune, and then he used his platform to do good and to prove himself. I think it's important to you that you be your own man. But sweetheart, there are so many doors open to you. You don't have to build one and run through it just to say you did." Which is a great way of putting it. Like, hey, you've got the privilege of, you were born, forget on third base. You're born, it's a sack fly, man. You're about to score. Take advantage of that. Use that as a way to get in the door and then show people. Because you can, it's kind of like we've talked about in sports and in pop culture, like, or in politics in this case. Yeah, certain doors will be open to you. If you're the son of a notable person or related to a notable person, they'll be open to you that they wouldn't be open to other people just by virtue of who you are. But you got to be good to stay there. That's the reality. That's why I've argued in favor of Bronny James. Like, yeah, Bronny James is not LeBron, obviously. Bronny James was a great high school player, good college player. Bronny James deserves to be in the NBA. It's not just because he's Bron's son. But back to the show. So she's getting, Jackie, we're talking about, is getting sicker. She's, conditions worsening. I think they said the cancer spread to like her spinal cord and her brain. Like, it's just, the conditions gotten worse. And by about midway through the episode, she passes away. And there's like this really moving scene of her giving her confession. The priest is ministering the last rites. And after that's over, there's the outpouring of grief and support, and there's everybody gathering outside to the apartment. They did a really good job. One of the few things I did know about JFK or had seen is when he comes out and makes the statement after his mom has passed outside of the New York City apartment. And you see obviously recreate that in the show. And all of these people are visiting. There's obviously Ted Kennedy's involved. I hope Ted Kennedy is involved in the last 4 episodes more than he has been, because he's kind of been just like in the background more so than anything. Regardless, you see Ted Kennedy, you see all of these people that knew JFK, Jackie Kennedy. And there's a great scene, Caroline, who's played by Grace Gummer, who does a phenomenal job in the role. She's like alone by herself in the bedroom, like trying to just kind of like compose herself, because it's a lot. Her mom's died and she's shaking a lot of people's hands. It's a lot. John Jr. goes in there to meet her. And she has a line. If I'm not getting it right, I'm close. She said, "I don't think they've said one thing about her, Jackie, that I'm going to miss." In the sense that she was elegant. She was so invested in the written word. And for them, it's like, she was our mom. She was a normal person, a very famous person, but a normal one nonetheless. And they told a joke about how when she found that Caroline when she was kind of going through a rebellious part of her young life, had like grown pot in their backyard, and they were like impersonating her. Like the interactions in the show between JFK Jr. and Caroline are absolutely outstanding. It's one of the highlights of the show, in my opinion. And so they have the funeral for Jackie Kennedy, and all the while Carolyn, Bissett, is watching the coverage, and she had met JFK Jr. right before that. He said like she was the only person he wanted to see in that moment, all of it. By the end of the episode, JFK Jr. reads a letter written by his mother to him shortly before she passed. He ends up in this, very emotionally charged scene. He's riding his bike. We know he loved to ride his bike through New York. He's riding it through the city. The rain's coming down in New York, and he shows up at her apartment, and she's like it's kind of the first time we see a more human, I don't say human, the kind of empathetic side of Carolyn, which friends have heard based on articles I've read have talked about like that. You didn't really get to see that from her in public because all they wanted to know is she having John F. Kennedy the third, or there wasn't that much interest in her individually, so to speak, just more her ties to him. And so you see that empathetic side. You're seeing her helping him to grieve and to cope. By the end of the episode, they're basically together. And so that's sort of my reaction to the first 3 episodes. We'll react to episodes 4 and 5 on Wednesday's show. But initial takeaways in the first 3 is I find JFK Jr., at least the way he's portrayed by Paul Anthony Kelly, to be extremely likable. Like, we tend to think of trust fund kids, sons of presidents, especially very good-looking sons of presidents who are afforded opportunities that the rest of us wouldn't otherwise have. And there's still this sense in his blood, like, I want to prove that I'm more than just my name and who my dad is, my mom is, which I find extremely likable. Like, it's not just, okay, yeah, I want to run for Congress or I want to run for governor of New York and eventually president of the United States. Like, I want to create something that is mine, which is what he's doing through the George magazine. So I find him to be extremely likable in this show. And I find, to go back to something I said earlier, I find Carolyn to be dope, to be just cool. Life of the party, understated, but also, just you feel her presence when you walk in the room. You kind of get that vibe from the show. And again, based on articles, it seems like that's how she was with friends, family, the whole bit. And so again, won't spoil anything from 4 and 5. I'll get into that more on Wednesday's show, but could not recommend it enough. Love Story FX. It's on Disney Plus. It's the #1 show on Disney Plus. Ryan Murphy, fantastic job. Paul Anthony Kelly, Sarah Pigeon, Naomi Watts, Grace Gummer. Whole cast is unbelievable. And I can't wait for episode 6 to come out Thursday. So we're going to be doing this reaction to each episode for the next, 4 Mondays post-show to give people time to watch the episode over the weekend and what have you. So react to 4 and 5 on Wednesday, and then every Monday after that, because it is unbelievable stuff. First, my entryway into it was, I love presidential history. So any extension of that, I'm automatically fascinated. It goes much deeper than that, and I absolutely love it. With that is all the time I have for today's show. Appreciate everybody stopping by. As always, be sure to catch Carving Up Live on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific time. Folks, we might have a mock draft. Now, I'm not saying we will. I'm saying we might. Might have our very first mock draft of 2026. You might want to stay tuned for that. It'll be either that and or Bryson's Best 10. We're going to have Carving Up the Context, some NBA stuff where we're getting that stretch run of the season where we kind of know who's good, who can win the title, who's a first-round exit. Saying all this to try and distract myself from the fact that Steph Curry hasn't played since January 30th. Man, this has been the season from hell as a Warriors fan. It's been a disaster. Wish you the best, Steph. Get back sooner rather than later. Hope everybody has a great week. We'll see you on Thursday, or rather on Wednesday, 6 Eastern, 3 Pacific time. Hit that big red subscribe button down there to help the YouTube channel, the show, grow exponentially. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcast. A few hours after the show has finished airing on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook and Twitch. Hope everybody has a great week. We will see you guys on Wednesday. Stay safe out there. God bless y'all. Peace out. Please, seriously, Steph, please get back. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.